she sheltered an old woman from a monster hurricane. The next day, 20 black SUVs surrounded her isolated house, revealing a secret that would make her life a fortune or ruin it forever. The outer bands of Hurricane Seraph screamed across the barrier island like the wrath of an ancient god, turning the Atlantic into a churning wall of gray fury. The weathered research outpost shuddered with each gust, salt spray lashing the reinforced windows as the storm's surge clawed at the dunes below. Mira Cladwell secured the last storm shutter for the third time that hour, her hands raw from the wind and cold. Inside, she moved through the familiar choreography of disaster preparation, monitoring equipment, logging data, double-checking the backup generator. Her dark eyes focused and methodical despite the chaos outside. The outpost was her sanctuary now, all that remained of her life before the scandal. Her radio crackled. "Cladwell, this is Coast Guard Station Oak Island. You are the last civilian on that barrier. Mandatory evac ends in 20 minutes. Confirm you're leaving." "Over." Mira pressed the transmit button. "Negative, Oak Island. The monitoring array can't survive automated. I'm staying with the equipment." "Ma'am, this is a Cat 5. You won't survive either." Mira looked out at the thrashing wetlands she'd spent 3 years protecting. "Someone has to stay. These ecosystems need a witness. I'll ride it out." Cladwell out. She killed the radio just as the wind suddenly died. For 20 minutes, maybe 30, the island would sit in eerie, deceptive calm. Mira moved to crack open the reinforced door for a damage assessment, and froze. A figure stood on her flooded access path, swaying slightly in the unnatural stillness. An elderly woman, soaked to the bone, her silver hair plastered to her face. But even drenched and shaking, there was something unmistakably refined about her. The cut of her now-ruined wool coat, the glint of gold jewelry at her throat, the way she held herself with fading, aristocratic composure. She looked like she'd stepped out of a charity gala and directly into the apocalypse. "Jesus," Mira lunged forward, catching the woman's elbow as she stumbled. "What are you doing out here? How did you even?" Mira didn't wait for answers. She hauled the woman inside, kicked the door shut, and guided her to the bench near the space heater. Within seconds, Mira had stripped off the woman's soaked coat, wrapped her in the thermal emergency blanket from the med kit, and pressed a mug of hot water mixed with electrolyte powder into her trembling hands. "Drink." Slowly. The woman obeyed, color gradually returning to her pale cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was cultured, gentle, and exhausted. "Thank you, dear. I'm Vera. Vera Sinclair." Mira Cladwell. Mira crouched in front of her, scanning for hypothermia signs. "Vera, what the hell were you doing out there?" "The island was evacuated 8 hours ago." Vera's hands tightened around the mug, and something fragile flickered across her face. Regret, hope, determination. "I was trying to reach my son. We haven't spoken in nearly 5 years. I thought," her voice cracked, "I thought if I came now, during this, he'd have to see me. That he'd have to come." Something in those words, the desperate calculation of a woman gambling with a hurricane to force reconciliation, cut through Mira's hardened defenses. She knew about broken families. She knew about desperate bets. Mira exhaled slowly. "The back half of the storm hits in 15 minutes. We're stuck here until dawn at the earliest. Once it's safe, I'll radio for help. What's your son's name? Where is he?" Vera's expression shifted, something unreadable, almost knowing, and she reached into her soaked handbag with shaking fingers, producing a business card sealed in a waterproof sleeve. Mira took it. The embossed lettering read, "Gael Harris, Chief Executive Officer. Harris, Global Development." In the next few minutes, everything would change. And if you want to see where this impossible connection leads, make sure you're subscribed. This is just the beginning. Mira's blood turned to ice. The outer bands of Hurricane Seraph screamed across the barrier island like the wrath of an ancient god, turning the Atlantic into a churning wall of gray fury. The weathered research outpost shuddered with each gust, salt spray lashing the reinforced windows as the storm's surge clawed at the dunes below. Mira Cladwell secured the last storm shutter for the third time that hour, her hands raw from the wind and cold. Inside, she moved through the familiar choreography of disaster preparation, monitoring equipment, logging data, double-checking the backup generator. Her dark eyes focused and methodical despite the chaos outside. The outpost was her sanctuary now, all that remained of her life before the scandal. Her radio crackled. "Cladwell, this is Coast Guard Station Oak Island. You are the last civilian on that barrier. Mandatory evac ends in 20 minutes. Confirm you're leaving." "Over." Mira pressed the transmit button. "Negative, Oak Island. The monitoring array can't survive automated. I'm staying with the equipment." "Ma'am, this is a Cat 5. You won't survive either." Mira looked out at the thrashing wetlands she'd spent 3 years protecting. "Someone has to stay. These ecosystems need a witness. I'll ride it out." "Cladwell out." She killed the radio just as the wind suddenly died. For 20 minutes, maybe 30, the island would sit in eerie, deceptive calm. Mira moved to crack open the reinforced door for a damage assessment, and froze. A figure stood on her flooded access path, swaying slightly in the unnatural stillness. An elderly woman, soaked to the bone, her silver hair plastered to her face. But even drenched and shaking, there was something unmistakably refined about her. The cut of her now-ruined wool coat, the glint of gold jewelry at her throat, the way she held herself with fading, aristocratic composure. She looked like she'd stepped out of a charity gala and directly into the apocalypse. "Jesus," Mira lunged forward, catching the woman's elbow as she stumbled. "What are you doing out here? How did you even?" Mira didn't wait for answers. She hauled the woman inside, kicked the door shut, and guided her to the bench near the space heater. Within seconds, Mira had stripped off the woman's soaked coat, wrapped her in the thermal emergency blanket from the med kit, and pressed a mug of hot water mixed with electrolyte powder into her trembling hands. "Drink." Slowly. The woman obeyed, color gradually returning to her pale cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was cultured, gentle, and exhausted. "Thank you, dear. I'm Vera. Vera Sinclair. Mira Cladwell." Mira crouched in front of her, scanning for hypothermia signs. "Vera, what the hell were you doing out there?" "The island was evacuated 8 hours ago." Vera's hands tightened around the mug, and something fragile flickered across her face. Regret, hope, determination. "I was trying to reach my son. We haven't spoken in nearly 5 years. I thought if I came now, during this, he'd have to see me. That he'd have to come." Something in those words cut through Mira's hardened defenses. She knew about broken families. She knew about desperate bets. Mira exhaled slowly. "Once it's safe, I'll radio for help. What's your son's name?" Vera reached into her soaked handbag with shaking fingers, producing a business card sealed in a waterproof sleeve. Mira took it. The embossed lettering read, "Gael Harris, Chief Executive Officer, Harris Global Development." Her blood turned to ice. Outside, the wind began to howl again. Mira stared at the card, the name burning into her vision like a brand. Harris Global Development. The company that had destroyed her family's name, turned her father into a pariah, and left her hiding on this isolated strip of sand and marsh grass. And she'd just saved the CEO's mother. "You know the name?" Vera's voice was quiet, observant. Not a question. Mira's jaw tightened. She set the card down on the table with deliberate care, her hands steadier than her racing pulse. "Everyone in environmental science knows Harris Global Development." Her tone was flat, professional. "Your son's company has a reputation for ruthlessness." Vera closed her eyes briefly. For winning at any cost. For viewing the world as nothing more than assets to be leveraged. She looked up at Mira, and there was such profound sadness in her gaze that Mira felt something crack in her defenses. "That's why I had to come. Before it's too late." "Too late for what?" "Before he becomes the empire entirely. Before there's nothing left of the boy I raised." Vera's voice trembled, but not from cold this time. Gael wasn't always like this. He was kind once. Curious. He wanted to build things that mattered, not just things that made money. But after his father died, after he took over HGD, she trailed off, staring into her mug. The company consumed him. Or perhaps he let it, to prove something. To prove he could control what his father couldn't. Mira should have stayed silent. Should have kept her distance. But the words came anyway. "And you think showing up in the middle of a hurricane will change that?" "I think," Vera said carefully, "that a man who has insulated himself with wealth and power needs something powerful enough to break through. I'm 73 years old, Miss Cladwell. I don't have the luxury of waiting for convenient moments." Outside, the back wall of the hurricane slammed into the island with renewed fury. The outpost groaned, and somewhere in the distance, something, a tree, a structure, gave way with a splintering crash. Mira moved to check Vera's vitals, more to have something to do with her hands than out of medical necessity. Pulse steady, pupils responsive. The woman was tougher than she looked. "He'll come for you," Mira said quietly. "When the storm passes and he realizes you're missing, he'll come. I'm counting on it." Vera caught Mira's wrist gently. "And I'm grateful you'll be here when he does." Gael surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear, who see the world the way he's trained himself to see it. "You're not one of those people, are you?" Mira pulled her hand back. "I'm just someone trying to survive the night." But even as she said it, she felt the trap closing. Gael Harris was coming. The man whose company had engineered her family's ruin, whose lawyers had buried the truth under mountains of legal maneuvering and crafted lies. And his mother, shivering under an emergency blanket in Mira's outpost, seemed to know far more than she was saying. The wind howled. The storm raged. And Mira realized she'd just become a piece on a board she didn't understand. Dawn broke over a landscape transformed into wreckage. The storm had passed, leaving the barrier island stripped and battered, the access road half submerged under debris and seawater. Mira stood on the outpost's small deck, surveying the damage to her monitoring equipment, when she heard it. The low rumble of engines. Many engines. She turned, shading her eyes against the pale morning sun, and felt her stomach drop. They came like an invading army. 20 black SUVs, maybe more, crawling across the flooded causeway in a synchronized convoy that spoke of money, power, and absolute determination. They fanned out in a precise semicircle around the outpost, blocking every possible exit, their tinted windows reflecting the devastated landscape like dark mirrors. Mira's hand instinctively moved to the satellite phone on her belt. She'd called the Coast Guard at first light to report Vera's presence. She hadn't expected this. The center vehicle's door opened, and a man stepped out. Gael Harris looked nothing like the soft corporate executives Mira had faced in conference rooms and depositions. He was sharp in every sense, tailored even in field gear. His dark jacket fitted perfectly across broad shoulders, his movements efficient and controlled. He was her age, maybe a year or two older, but he carried himself with the kind of authority that didn't ask for permission. His eyes swept the outpost with cold calculation before locking onto Mira. He didn't walk. He advanced. "Where is she?" His voice cut through the salt air, brooking no preamble. Mira stepped forward, deliberately placing herself between him and the door. "Vera is resting. She's been through a traumatic. I didn't ask for a medical assessment. I asked where my mother is." He moved closer, and Mira realized he was used to people stepping aside. "Miss Cladwell, I presume? The Coast Guard said you sheltered her. I'm grateful. Now step aside. She's inside. She's safe. And she stays that way until your security circus backs off." Mira held her ground, even as a dozen men in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, hands near their belts. "This is a research facility on protected wetlands. You don't have authority to." "I have every authority." Gael pulled a folded document from his jacket. "Emergency Family Welfare Clause, Federal Disaster Protocols, and if you'd like, I can have my legal team on the phone in 30 seconds to explain exactly how much authority I have. Or you can let me see my mother." Mira's hands clenched. Everything about him. The fleet of vehicles, the implied threat, the presumption that money and lawyers could override everything, confirmed every fear she'd harbored through the long night. "She came here looking for you," Mira said quietly. "Not your security detail. Not your lawyers. You." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation at being read so easily. Before he could respond, Vera's voice drifted from the doorway. "Gael, that's enough." They both turned. Vera stood in the threshold, wrapped in Mira's spare jacket, looking fragile but utterly composed. "Hello, darling," she said softly. "It's been too long." Gael's security team reported back within the hour. The causeway was structurally compromised, unsafe for the convoy until engineers could assess it. Minimum wait time, 6 hours. Possibly 12. Mira watched Gael's jaw tighten at the news, watched him calculate and recalibrate. She almost enjoyed it. The man who commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, trapped in her 1,200-square-foot outpost by physics and flood damage. "You can wait outside," she said, moving past him to check the solar panel array. There's plenty of space in your armored vehicles. My mother needs climate control and medical monitoring. His tone was clipped. We're staying. Then your people stay outside. This isn't a command center. It's barely a research station. Gael surveyed the modest interior with thinly veiled disdain. You're monitoring what exactly? Erosion patterns? Migratory bird populations? This entire island is a sinking sandbar with delusions of ecological significance. Mira turned slowly, her dark eyes sharp. This sandbar is a critical buffer zone protecting 20 miles of mainland coast. It's a nesting ground for endangered species and a natural filtration system for one of the most biodiverse estuaries on the eastern seaboard. But I wouldn't expect you to see past the real estate value. Real estate generates tax revenue. Tax revenue funds schools, infrastructure, hospitals. Your birds don't pay for emergency services or climate adaptation. He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space. This outpost exists because someone wealthy enough donated the grant money. You protect nature with capital you claim to despise. I protect nature from people like you who see it as something to leverage. And what exactly do you know about people like me, Miss Cladwell? Everything, she wanted to say. I know you bury evidence. I know you destroy families to protect profit margins. I know your company's lawyers are as ruthless as you are. But Vera's voice cut through the tension. Gael, could you help me with this? She was struggling with the zipper on her borrowed jacket, her hands still weak from the previous night's exposure. The transformation was instant. Gael moved to his mother's side, his rigid posture softening as he knelt beside her chair. His hands were gentle as he adjusted the jacket, his voice dropping to something almost tender. You should rest. I can have a medical team here in. I don't need a medical team. I need my son to stop treating the world like a hostile acquisition. Vera's eyes moved between them. And I need you both to stop circling each other like wolves. Gael stood, his expression closing off again. But Mira had seen it. The crack in the armor, the genuine concern, the man beneath the CEO facade. It unsettled her more than his arrogance had. 6 hours, she said finally. Then your engineers clear the causeway and you leave. Until then, stay out of my lab space. Gael met her gaze, something unreadable in his expression. Agreed. But neither of them moved, and the air between them remained charged with everything unspoken. The causeway assessment stretched into the afternoon. Vera dozed in the small sleeping alcove, leaving Mira and Gael in the main room, orbiting each other like wary satellites. Mira was updating her damage logs when Gael spoke, his voice quieter than before. You said you wouldn't expect me to see past real estate value. That was specific, personal. She didn't look up. Your company has a reputation. You said that before, but you're not talking about reputation. You're talking about experience. Mira's pen stilled on the page. She could deflect. Should deflect. But something about the past 12 hours, the storm, Vera's fragile hope, the exhaustion, had worn down her usual defenses. 7 years ago, she said finally, my father was the lead environmental consultant on a coastal development deal. He filed a report documenting that the proposed construction would devastate a protected wetland ecosystem. 2 weeks later, a revised report appeared with his signature, approving the project. He was accused of accepting bribes, of falsifying data. His career ended. His reputation was destroyed. He died 18 months later, still fighting to prove the second report was a fraud. Gael was silent for a long moment. What was the project? The Crescent Bay Resort. Harris Global Development was the primary investor. She finally looked at him, expecting denial or deflection. Instead, she saw something she hadn't anticipated, recognition. I know that project. His voice was tight. It was one of my father's final deals before he died. The environmental approval was legally questionable. The entire partnership structure was designed to obscure liability. He moved to the window, his back to her. That's why I took over HGD. Not to build an empire. To clean up the wreckage he left behind. Convenient timing for a confession. It's not a confession. It's context. He turned, and his expression was harder now, defensive. My father built HGD on aggressive expansion and ethical shortcuts. When I inherited control, I inherited a company structured around plausible deniability and legal loopholes. I've spent 5 years trying to redirect it, to build something legitimate. But you can't dismantle a fortress while living inside it. So you became the fortress instead. I became what I needed to be to survive the transition. Just like you became a recluse on an isolated island to survive your family's scandal. His eyes locked on hers. We're not that different, Miss Cladwell. We're nothing alike. I protect things. You consume them. I'm trying to repair them. There's a difference. Mira wanted to dismiss him, to hold on to her certainty that he was simply another corporate predator with a polished rationalization. But something in his voice, frustration, exhaustion, the weight of an inherited burden, echoed too closely to her own experience. Your company destroyed my father, she said quietly. My father destroyed a lot of things, Gael replied, including, apparently, any chance of you trusting that I'm not him. Outside, the sun broke through the dispersing clouds, casting long shadows across the damaged landscape. Neither of them looked away. The sound of the approaching vehicle cut through the mid-morning stillness like a blade. Mira's head snapped up from the debris she'd been cataloging near the collapsed observation deck. Another SUV, this one sleeker, darker, accompanied by two more behind it. Not part of Gael's convoy. Something about their formation felt different. Predatory. Gael emerged from the outpost, his expression hardening as the lead vehicle stopped. The door opened, and a man stepped out with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never been denied entrance anywhere. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed despite the devastation around them. His smile was practiced, warm, utterly empty. Gael, he called, arms spread in greeting. Thank God. When we couldn't reach you, I mobilized immediately. Simon. Gael's voice was flat, uninviting. This wasn't necessary. Family is always necessary. Simon Reed's gaze swept the outpost, the wreckage, and landed on Vera standing in the doorway. Then his eyes found Mira. She felt the recognition like a physical blow. His expression didn't change. The smile remained perfectly calibrated, but something flickered in his eyes. Knowledge. Calculation. Threat. And you must be our gracious host, Simon said smoothly, crossing to her with an extended hand. Simon Reed, Chief Legal Officer of Harris Global Development. We're incredibly grateful for your care of Mrs. Sinclair. Mira forced herself to take his hand. His grip was firm, lingering a fraction too long. Former Chief Legal Officer, she said quietly, recalling Gael's earlier mention. Consultant now, Simon corrected, his smile never wavering. Though family crises have a way of restoring old titles, don't they? He turned to Gael. We need to discuss the Harborfront deal. The optics of this situation, your mother stranded, you unreachable. The board is concerned. Later, Gael said tersely. Of course. Simon's attention drifted back to Mira with unsettling focus. I have to say, you look remarkably familiar. Have we met before? Perhaps at a conference? Environmental science, isn't it? Mira's blood turned to ice. I don't attend conferences. Simon tilted his head, the picture of innocent curiosity. Cladwell, did you say your name was? That rings a bell. There was a rather unfortunate situation years ago, wasn't there? A coastal development deal, a disputed environmental report. He trailed off, watching her face. But I'm probably misremembering. Gael's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Nothing, Simon said, waving a dismissive hand. Just trying to place a familiar face. You know how it is. In our line of work, we encounter so many environmental assessments. Some more controversial than others. His smile sharpened. I'm sure Miss Cladwell's work here is beyond reproach. Though it must be lonely, isolating oneself on a barrier island. One might wonder what someone's running from. Mira felt Gael's gaze shift to her, questions forming. Vera had gone very still in the doorway. Simon's voice dropped to a tone of concern. Gael, perhaps we should speak privately. There are complexities to this situation you're not aware of. The trap was closing, and Simon Reed held every thread. Simon found her an hour later, alone by the water's edge where she'd gone to steady herself. She'd known he would. Predators always isolated their prey. Beautiful, isn't it? He said conversationally, stopping beside her. Even after devastation, there's a certain raw appeal. I can see why Gael's interested in the view. He paused. And I do mean the view. Mira didn't look at him. What do you want? The same thing you want. Protection. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. There's a certified check in here for $2 million. Enough to start over somewhere far from here. Somewhere quiet, where you can continue your important work without complications. I'm not leaving. Miss Cladwell, Mira, let's not play games. I know exactly who you are. Mira Cladwell's daughter. The environmental scientist whose family was destroyed by the Meridian Shores scandal. His voice was silk over steel. I know because I wrote the amended report myself. Every fraudulent data point, every falsified assessment. Your mother's signature was embarrassingly easy to forge. The confirmation landed like a fist to her chest. She'd suspected, had nightmares about it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. You destroyed her. I protected my client's interests, Simon corrected. HGD needed that coastline. Your mother's legitimate report was inconvenient. But here's what you need to understand. That was 8 years ago. Ancient history. What matters now is Gael's harborfront revitalization deal. $12 billion for 1,000 jobs. The crown jewel of HGD's redemption arc. He stepped closer. A deal that requires absolute confidence in HGD's environmental integrity. One whisper of past fraud. One hint that the company has a history of falsifying reports, and the whole thing collapses. Regulatory review. Investor panic. Total implosion. Good, Mira said, her voice shaking. You should collapse. Admirable conviction. But consider this. If you expose the Meridian fraud, I'll ensure every outlet knows the full story. How your mother was so desperate to save her career that she doctored her own report. How you've been hiding here, sitting on evidence for years, complicit in the cover-up. By the time I'm done, the Cladwell name won't just be disgraced. It'll be synonymous with corruption. His smile was gentle, paternal. Your mother died with a shred of dignity. Do you really want to take that from her memory? Mira's hands clenched into fists. Terror warred with rage, both threatening to choke her. Gael is my family. He'll believe what I need him to believe. Simon tucked the envelope into her jacket pocket. Take the money. Disappear before the roads reopen. Or I promise you, Mira, you'll wish the hurricane had finished what it started. He walked away, leaving her with $2 million and the weight of an impossible choice. Behind her, hidden in the shadow of the damaged outpost, Vera Sinclair lowered her phone. She'd recorded every word. Mira was still standing by the water, the envelope burning in her pocket, when Vera's voice cut through her paralysis. Gael, come here. Now. She turned to find Vera standing on the battered deck, phone in hand, her elegant face hard as stone. Gael emerged from the outpost, Simon a step behind him, both men stopping at the command in her tone. Mother, what? Listen. Vera held up the phone and pressed play. Simon's voice filled the air, smooth and venomous. Asterisk. I wrote the amended report myself. Every fraudulent data point, every falsified assessment. Your mother's signature was embarrassingly easy to forge. Asterisk. The color drained from Gael's face. His eyes locked on Simon, who'd gone perfectly still, his polished mask finally cracking. Vera, Simon said carefully. You don't understand the context. Shut up. Gael's voice was lava, controlled and lethal. He turned to Mira. Is it true? Do you have evidence? Mira's throat was tight. This was the moment. The precipice. She could take Simon's money, vanish, protect herself. Or she could burn it all down. Yes, she whispered. The original environmental assessment my mother submitted. The authentic data sets. Chain of custody documentation. Everything that proves HGD falsified the Meridian Shores report to secure the development contract. Where? Encrypted cloud storage. Multiple redundant servers. Legally sealed with 3 different law firms. She met his eyes. I've been sitting on it for 8 years, waiting for the right moment. Or the courage. Gael's jaw worked. She could see the calculation behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of damage. If you release that, the harborfront deal is dead. The regulatory review alone will tank investor confidence. The board will force me out. HGD will, he stopped. It might not survive. I know, Mira said. That's why I haven't released it. But Simon just threatened to destroy what's left of my mother's name if I don't disappear. So now you have to choose. Her voice broke. Your empire or the truth. Simon stepped forward, his composure returning. Gael, think about this. $12 billion. For 1,000 jobs. Everything we've built. Everything your father. My father was a corrupt bastard who left me a company built on lies, Gael said quietly. His eyes never left Mira's. I've spent 10 years trying to redeem something irredeemable. Trying to clean a legacy that was rotten from the foundation. He turned to Simon. You're done. Security. 2 of Gael's men appeared instantly. Escort Mr. Reed off the property. Then contact our general counsel and the FBI's white-collar division. Gail's voice was stone. We're going to give them everything. Simon's face twisted. You're destroying your own company for her. No, Gail said, moving to stand beside Mira. I'm destroying it for what it should have been from the beginning. He looked at Mira, and something raw and honest passed between them. Release the evidence. All of it. We do this right. Mira nodded, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. The empire began to fall. The FBI arrived within 48 hours. Simon Reed was arrested on the mainland, led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed, and HGD's stock price plummeted. The evidence Mira released was ironclad, damning not just Simon, but revealing a pattern of environmental fraud that reached back 15 years. The media firestorm was immediate and merciless. Gael stood in front of the cameras and did something his father never had. He told the truth. Every corrupt deal, every falsified report, every ethical compromise. He dismantled the legacy he'd fought so hard to control, piece by public piece. HGD didn't collapse entirely. It fragmented, restructured, bled value and prestige. But it survived, smaller and humbled, with Gael at the helm and a new mission statement that prioritized environmental integrity over profit margins. Mira's settlement came through 4 months later. $47 million, plus a formal exoneration that cleared her mother's name in every publication that had once destroyed it. She didn't hesitate. Every dollar went into establishing the Cladwell-Sinclair Ecological Trust, a permanent conservation easement that would protect the barrier island and 300 miles of surrounding coastline in perpetuity. Gail's first project under HGD's new ethical framework was building the Trust's headquarters, a state-of-the-art research facility powered entirely by renewable energy, designed to withstand Category 5 hurricanes. 6 months after Hurricane Seraph, Mira stood in the rebuilt outpost, watching the sunset paint the restored marshland in gold. The ring on her finger caught the light, a simple band of recycled platinum with a single ethical diamond. Gael had proposed on the same stretch of beach where she'd almost taken Simon's blood money. Still can't believe she did it, Gael said, joining her on the deck, sliding an arm around her waist. Mira smiled. Vera's confession had come last week, casual as commenting on the weather. Oh, did I not mention? I told the taxi driver exactly which address to take me to during the storm. I'd been researching you for months, dear. When I realized what Simon had done to your family, and what my son was becoming. Well, sometimes fate needs a firm hand. She orchestrated a Category 5 hurricane shelter situation like a matchmaker arranging a dinner party, Mira said, shaking her head. She's terrifying, Gael agreed fondly. She's family now. So are you. He turned her to face him, his expression serious. Any regrets? You could have taken Simon's money. Disappeared. Kept your isolation. Mira looked out at the island, the research facility rising in the distance, the ecosystem thriving under protection. She thought of her mother's cleared name, of the truth finally told, of the man beside her who'd chosen integrity over empire. Isolation kept me safe, she said quietly. But this, she gestured at everything they'd built together. This is what I was supposed to protect all along. Gael kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon, and somewhere in the elegant beach house down the coast, Vera Sinclair smiled and poured herself a victory gin. If you believe some storms are meant to bring the right people together, and that integrity is worth more than empires, consider subscribing for more stories where love and justice refuse to compromise. Your support helps us bring more powerful narratives to life. Until the next story, stay fierce, stay honest, and never underestimate the power of a woman with evidence.